If you're thinking about buying a Chinese electric car in Canada this year, you need to hear this first, because the brand you're looking at right now might not exist in 18 months. These 6 Chinese car companies are hemorrhaging billions of dollars, losing market share, and showing warning signs that every potential buyer needs to understand before signing anything. Some of them have already issued official warnings about their own survival. I'm going to start with the one you'd least expect, and by the time we get to number 1, you're going to understand why this might be the most important video you watch before making a purchase decision. BYD. I know exactly what you're thinking right now. BYD, the world's biggest electric vehicle company, the one backed by Warren Buffett, the one that outsells Tesla globally? You're telling me they're a bankruptcy risk? Not exactly, and that's precisely what makes this so dangerous. Here's the thing most people don't understand. BYD, the corporation, is probably fine. They're profitable, they're massive, they sell over 3 million vehicles a year, they make their own batteries, their own chips, their own everything. As a company, they're one of the most vertically integrated automakers on the planet. But that doesn't mean you're fine if you buy one in Canada. And this distinction is what's going to cost thousands of Canadian buyers their money if they're not careful. Let me explain. In May 2025, something terrifying happened in China. Shandong Qiancheng Holdings, which was BYD's largest dealer network in an entire province, completely collapsed overnight. More than 20 dealerships closed without warning. Showrooms emptied. Customers were ghosted. Thousands of people who had prepaid for insurance packages, maintenance plans, and lifetime service agreements were left holding worthless contracts. Some staff hadn't been paid in 6 months. The chairman of BYD himself had visited their flagship store just 1 year earlier. Didn't matter. Gone. And here's what BYD said about it. Essentially nothing. Because dealerships are separate companies. BYD builds cars. What happens after that isn't their problem. Now imagine that scenario in Canada. You buy a BYD, the dealership that sold it to you goes under. Your warranty claim gets rejected because there's nobody to process it. Your car needs a part that takes 3 months to arrive from China. Meanwhile, you're making payments on a vehicle you can't drive. BYD has no dealership network in Canada yet. They have regulatory approval to sell here, but zero infrastructure, zero service centers, zero parts supply chain. They're going to have to build everything from scratch in a market they don't understand, with a brand Canadians don't trust, during a trade war that could change the rules at any moment. That's not a bankruptcy risk, that's an abandonment risk. And for you as a buyer, the result is exactly the same. If BYD is this uncertain with all their resources, wait until you hear about number 5. Because this company doesn't even exist as a public company anymore. Zeekr. Zeekr was supposed to be different. This was the Chinese answer to Porsche. Premium electric vehicles backed by Geely, the same conglomerate that owns Volvo, Polestar, and Lotus. They have access to world-class engineering resources. They share platforms with some of the most respected brands in automotive. They went public in the United States in May 2024 with huge expectations and significant Wall Street interest. Then something very strange happened. In 2025, just 1 year after their IPO, Geely took Zeekr private again. They bought back all the shares at $25.87 each, valuing the company at about $6.8 billion. On paper, this was framed as streamlining operations and reducing complexity in Geely's automotive portfolio. The corporate speak sounded reasonable. In reality, it meant one thing. Zeekr was not performing the way public markets expected, and Geely didn't want investors watching every quarterly loss report and asking uncomfortable questions about when profitability would arrive. And there were significant losses. Zeekr reported over $1.16 billion in net losses in 2023. Revenue was growing, sure, the cars were selling, but the money going out was exceeding the money coming in, and the gap wasn't closing fast enough to justify the burn rate. The company was spending aggressively on expansion, on marketing, on infrastructure, while hemorrhaging cash in ways that public investors were starting to notice. Now they're private again, which means you and I have absolutely no visibility into their financial health anymore. No quarterly reports to analyze, no earnings calls to listen to, no transparency whatsoever. Just trust us. For a company that's asking Canadian consumers to trust them with a $50,000 to $140,000 purchase, that's a problem. Here's the other issue. Zeekr vehicles are manufactured in China. With Canadian tariffs in flux and geopolitical tensions rising, the cost to import these cars could change dramatically at any moment. If margins collapse, Zeekr will do what every struggling company does. They'll cut the unprofitable markets first. And guess which market has the smallest presence and the highest regulatory burden? Canada. The 001 and the 007 are genuinely impressive vehicles. The FR version makes over 1,200 horsepower. But impressive vehicles from companies with no transparency and uncertain futures make terrible purchases. And if Zeekr's private ownership concerns you, the next company should terrify you, because their losses are measured in billions per quarter. Xpeng. Xpeng has been called the most technologically advanced Chinese electric vehicle company. Their autonomous driving system, called Xpilot, genuinely rivals what Tesla offers. Their charging network is expanding at an impressive rate. They have a partnership with Volkswagen that lends them serious credibility in Western markets. Their G6 and G9 SUVs have received glowing reviews from automotive journalists around the world, and they still cannot figure out how to stop losing money, year after year after year. In 2024, Xpeng lost approximately 5.79 billion yuan. That's around $800 million gone in a single year. Their cumulative losses since founding are measured in the billions, not millions, billions. And yes, if you look at the trend line, things are improving. Losses are narrowing quarter by quarter, gross margins are climbing toward healthy levels. The trajectory looks like it's heading in the right direction. But here's what most people don't understand about trajectory. Trajectory isn't survival. Trajectory is a prediction, and predictions don't keep the lights on. Xpeng is currently burning through cash at a rate that requires constant fresh investment to sustain operations. They have about $6.2 billion in cash reserves, which sounds like an enormous war chest until you realize they're spending over $1 billion per year on research and development alone. That's before you add operating expenses, before expansion costs, before the brutal Chinese price war that's crushing margins across every single company in the industry. BYD started that price war. They can afford it because they're profitable. Xpeng cannot. Every price cut in China puts more pressure on a company that's already bleeding. The company has never turned a quarterly profit in its entire existence. Not once. Every single quarter since they started has been red. Now consider what happens if they enter Canada. They'll need to build a service network, train technicians, stock parts, run marketing campaigns, handle warranty claims. All of that costs money they're already struggling to generate. If Xpeng hits a cash crunch, if investment dries up, if the Chinese government stops subsidizing their expansion, Canadian operations would be the first thing cut. Your Xpeng G9 would become an orphan overnight. But here's the really scary part. Xpeng's financial situation looks healthy compared to the next company on this list, because this brand has lost more money than most people can comprehend. NIO. NIO has lost over 130 billion yuan since they started. I need you to actually process that number for a moment. That's approximately $18 billion. $18 billion. Gone. Burned. Evaporated into the atmosphere while investors watched and hoped things would turn around. To put this in perspective, you could buy every single professional sports team in an entire Canadian city for less than what NIO has lost. You could fund NASA's entire annual budget and still have money left over. This is a staggering amount of destruction of investor capital. In the first quarter of 2025 alone, NIO lost 6.75 billion yuan. One quarter. That's almost $1 billion burned in 90 days. Their asset to liability ratio is 92.55%, which in financial terms means they owe almost as much as everything they own. Their current liabilities actually exceed their current assets, which is the kind of number that makes accountants sweat. And here's the really concerning part. Their cash reserves dropped from 42 billion yuan to 26 billion yuan in a single quarter. That's a 16 billion yuan decline in 3 months. At that burn rate, analysts estimate they have about 2 years of runway before they run out of money completely. Some estimates say less. The founder, William Li, has publicly stated the goal of achieving profitability by Q4 2025. He's been saying variations of this promise for years. It hasn't happened yet, and now he's on the record at internal meetings saying profitability must be achieved, with an urgency that suggests even he understands time is running out. When a CEO starts talking like that internally, you should listen. NIO's entire business model is capital intensive. They don't just sell cars. They operate over 3,600 battery swap stations worldwide. They run charging networks. They provide services. All of it requires massive ongoing investment that they fund with money they don't actually have. The battery swap concept is genuinely innovative. 3-minute swaps instead of 30-minute charges. It's compelling, but innovation doesn't pay bills. Revenue pays bills, and NIO's revenue isn't covering their expenses. Here's what happens if NIO fails. Those battery swap stations go offline. That network you were counting on disappears. Your NIO becomes a regular electric car that you can only charge the normal way, except now the software stops updating, the app stops working, and nobody answers when you call for support. Canadian buyers need to understand something. When you buy a NIO, you're not just buying a car. You're buying into an ecosystem that requires the company to survive and thrive for decades. Based on their financial statements, that's a very risky bet right now. And if NIO's losses concern you, wait until you see what's already happened to the next brand. Because they didn't just struggle in a new market, they got absolutely destroyed. Hongqi. Hongqi is the official state car of China. Presidents ride in Hongqi limousines. The brand carries prestige that dates back to the 1950s. When they announced expansion into Europe, it seemed like a logical step for a company backed by one of the world's most powerful governments. It was a disaster. The Hongqi EHS9, their flagship electric SUV, became the fastest depreciating car in multiple European markets. Swedish Consumer Reports documented catastrophic resale value collapse. Owners who paid full price watched their vehicles lose half their value or more within the first year. But depreciation was just the beginning of the problems. Service nightmares became legendary. Parts took months to arrive. Dealerships couldn't get technical support. Warranty claims were rejected or delayed indefinitely. Some owners reported that spare parts for their vehicles were literally among the most expensive in the world, priced higher than equivalent parts for European luxury brands. The Swedish National Board for Consumer Disputes had to get involved because complaints were piling up so fast. This is a brand backed by the Chinese government. They have essentially unlimited resources, and they still couldn't figure out how to service customers in a developed Western market. Now imagine them trying to operate in Canada. Same problems, different country, except Canada is even farther from China, has an even smaller market, and has even less tolerance for poor customer service. If Hongqi couldn't make Europe work with all their backing, what makes anyone think Canada would be different? The EHS9 looks like a Rolls-Royce Cullinan because it was designed by the same person, but looking like luxury and delivering luxury are two completely different things. European buyers learned that lesson the hard way. Canadian buyers should learn from their mistakes. And now we arrive at number 1, the brand on this list that isn't heading toward potential bankruptcy. They're already there. The warning has already been issued. Polestar. In September 2025, Polestar did something that no car company ever wants to do, something that should make every potential buyer stop and think very carefully. They issued a going concern warning. If you're not familiar with financial terminology, let me translate. A going concern warning is as close to saying we might not survive as a publicly traded company can legally get without actually filing for bankruptcy protection. It's the corporate equivalent of a doctor saying you should probably get your affairs in order. This isn't speculation, this isn't rumor, this is Polestar themselves, in official regulatory filings, telling shareholders and potential customers that there is substantial doubt about their ability to continue operating as a business. Their stock collapsed. And I don't mean it declined, I mean it collapsed in a way that destroyed almost everything. The shares had already fallen from highs around $13 after their 2022 IPO to around 22 cents per share. 22 cents, less than a cup of coffee. They had to execute a 1-for-30 reverse stock split just to avoid being automatically delisted from NASDAQ for failing to meet the $1 minimum share price requirement. After the split, shares continued crashing anyway. The company has lost over 96% of its market value since going public. 96%. If you invested $10,000 in Polestar at their IPO, you'd have about $400 left today. That's not a correction. That's not a bear market pullback. That's a catastrophe of historic proportions. The numbers tell the full story. Polestar has accumulated approximately $8 billion in cumulative losses since they started. $8 billion gone while building a brand that might not survive. They posted a $1.03 billion loss in Q2 2025 alone. They took a $739 million non-cash impairment charge on the Polestar 3 SUV because tariffs and weak demand completely destroyed their sales projections. The cuts kept coming. They laid off 15% of their workforce in early 2024. Then more layoffs followed. Then they closed their UK R&D facilities entirely, making 130 engineers redundant in a single announcement. The head of their electrical and electronics division wrote a gut-wrenching LinkedIn post about watching nearly 7 years of hard work and dedication gradually being dismantled. That's not normal corporate restructuring, that's a company fighting for survival. And then the really bad news hit. Volvo walked away from them. The financial backing from their Swedish partner that was supposed to guarantee stability and credibility simply vanished. Now, Polestar is entirely dependent on Geely, their Chinese parent company, for emergency funding just to keep the lights on. They recently secured $300 million in new financing and converted another $300 million of debt into equity. That's not investment in growth. That's a life support machine. Here's what this means for Canadian buyers. Polestar is sold in Canada right now. You can walk into dealerships and buy one today, but you'd be buying a car from a company that has publicly admitted it might not survive. What happens to your warranty if Polestar collapses? What happens to software updates? What happens when you need parts and there's nobody left to supply them? What happens to resale value when the brand no longer exists? These aren't hypothetical questions anymore. The going concern warning makes them real. Polestar themselves are telling you there's significant doubt about their ability to continue operating. Some buyers will look at the discounts that inevitably come with struggling companies and think they're getting a deal. Maybe they are. Or maybe they're buying a $70,000 paperweight. Here's what you need to understand about what's coming. The Canadian government is about to let 49,000 Chinese electric vehicles into the country per year under the new tariff agreement. That number is expected to grow to 70,000 annually within 5 years. More brands will enter, more dealerships will open, more salespeople will show you impressive spec sheets and incredible price tags that make everything from Detroit and Germany look overpriced. And you're going to be tempted. You're going to look at a car that costs $30,000 less than its competitors and does the same things. You're going to think you're getting a deal. You're going to imagine yourself driving something that makes your neighbors curious. But a cheap car from a dead company isn't a bargain. It's a liability. It's a ticking time bomb sitting in your driveway, waiting to become worthless the moment the company that made it stops answering the phone. Before you sign anything, before you put down a deposit, before you get seduced by the specifications and the features and the price tags, ask yourself one question: will this company exist in 5 years? For some of these brands, the honest answer is nobody knows. For others, the evidence clearly suggests they might not make it to 2027. For at least one brand on this list, they've already told you themselves that survival is uncertain. Do your research. Don't just look at reviews about how the car drives. Check the financial statements. Look at the loss reports. Understand the burn rates. Calculate the runway. Know what you're actually buying. Because when the warranty company doesn't answer the phone, when the parts never arrive from overseas, when your car sits in a parking lot waiting for service that never comes, it won't matter how good the specs were. It won't matter how impressed your neighbors were. It won't matter how much money you thought you saved. All that will matter is that you bought a product from a company that couldn't stay in business long enough to honor its promises. Canada is about to become a testing ground for Chinese electric vehicles. We're going to be the experiment. Some of these brands will figure it out. They'll build networks, earn trust, learn from their mistakes, and become permanent parts of the Canadian automotive landscape. Others will fail spectacularly. They'll burn through whatever investor money they have left, cut their losses at the first sign of trouble, and abandon the customers who believed in them without a second thought. The question isn't whether some of these companies will fail. The question is whether you can tell the difference between the survivors and the casualties before it's too late. Your neighbor might buy one of these cars and brag about the savings. In 3 years, they might also have a paperweight in their garage that nobody will service and nobody will buy. Choose carefully. Your money deserves better than becoming someone else's bad bet.